Hello and good evening. I'm Melissa Idris.
And I'm Shrad.
Welcome to Consider This. This is the show where we want you to consider and then reconsider what you know of the news of the day. News reports have confirmed that efforts to broker a ceasefire between Israel and Palestine are ongoing, but little progress appears to have been made as fighting now enters a 10th day. What hopes of a ceasefire soon so humanitarian aid can be delivered? Well, we welcome on the show tonight His Excellency Walid Abu Ali, the Ambassador of the State of Palestine to Malaysia, Maldives and Brunei. Good evening, Your Excellency. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. Now, I was wondering whether you can help us understand the current diplomatic efforts being undertaken to de-escalate tensions.
Well, good evening, everybody, and Eid Mubarak to everybody. I highly appreciate giving me the opportunity to speak to your viewers tonight. Let me start where you started. When you mentioned ceasefire, usually ceasefire is made between two armies. Unfortunately, the Israeli army, very well equipped, are striking and targeting innocent civilians in Palestine. So if we want to achieve a ceasefire, we have to be fair and we have to have balanced war. The war crime at the moment carried out by the Israeli army against our Palestinian innocent civilians is, from our views, considered a state terrorism carried out by the Israelis, resulted in killing hundreds, injuring thousands, creating homeless Palestinians. More than 50,000 Palestinians become homeless. So many women and children were targeted and were victims through the Israeli airstrikes.
Your Excellency, if I could just ask you, though, Hamas has been shooting rockets into Israel, so there is some form of firepower coming from the occupied territories into Israel, numbering hundreds, perhaps already 1,000 by now. But to that extent, is it important to consider that a ceasefire is a reasonable diplomatic objective?
Well, the issue is not Hamas, the issue is not Fatah. All Palestinians are targeted by the Israelis. And from the Israeli point of view, good Palestinian is a dead Palestinian. The Israeli rocket does not differentiate between whether you are Hamas or Fatah or innocent Palestinian. The issue that Palestinians are rocketing Israel, what Benjamin Netanyahu and his government are expecting Palestinians to keep silent when Benjamin Netanyahu and his army with his police and his settler invaded Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa during the last week of Ramadan, when they decided to take over Sheikh Jarrah, when they continued with their aggression against Palestinians inside the Green Line in Israel, inside the West Bank, in Jerusalem, and against our civilian in Gaza. Are they expecting Palestinians to keep silent? Of course, Palestinians has the right to defend themselves with all what is available.
Your Excellency, I'm wondering where the diplomatic efforts are right now. I mean, particularly we have a recent statement by U.S. President Joe Biden saying for the first time, expressing support for a de-escalation of violence. Where do you see diplomatic efforts leading perhaps to a de-escalation of tensions? Is that likely in the near future?
Well, in my views, the U.S. administration, who had decided to support Israel in the Security Council when the issue was discussed in the Security Council, and 14 countries out of 15 asked to achieve a ceasefire. The initiative, the United States of America voted against. So unfortunately, the American administration, with its support to Israel, encouraging Israel to continue their aggression against the Palestinian people. We believe that the U.S. administration must be fair and play a fair position between Palestine and Israel. But when they decide to be Israelis more than the Israelis, this will never achieve peace and stability in our region.
Your Excellency, what about the many Arab governments that have in recent years opened up diplomatic ties with the State of Israel? Has that complicated matters? Are the Palestinians getting the support from neighboring Arab countries?
At the moment, let me clearly say that Benjamin Netanyahu's government had lost even the friendship they created with some of the Arab regimes. All I can say proudly that all Arab Ummah and all Muslim Ummah are united, supporting and backing up Palestinians. If any of the Arab countries or the Islamic countries who were in favor of having diplomatic relations with Israel, normalizing relation with Israel, I think these steps have been totally, at the moment, against the wish and the will of the Israeli government.
Right. Your Excellency, Ambassador Walid, can I just ask a last question for you? I'm wondering, despite the ongoing hostilities, is humanitarian aid being brought into the affected areas, the people who need it? What can we do to ensure that it's received?
Well, Malaysia always been a great supporter to Palestine and the Palestinians. And they always provided Palestinians with all kinds of humanitarian aids. Malaysians always supported Palestine, and they provided them with what they can do. Unfortunately, our borders are controlled by the Israelis, and any aids needed urgently to be sent to our people has to go through the Israeli borders, which is under their control. So I do hope the international community force Israel to allow external aids, humanitarian aids, to reach those who needs it, whether it's in Gaza, in the West Bank, or in Jerusalem.
All right. Well, thank you so much for speaking with us tonight, Your Excellency. We appreciate your time. Thank you.
It's a pleasure. Thank you very much all.
After this, we're going to be taking a look at what humanitarian aid is needed by Gaza. We're going to be speaking to Mercy Malaysia in just a few minutes. Stay tuned to consider this.
Induknya adalah Melayu.
Balik kepada support system. This is orang yang membuat polisi.
Kalau itu yang dikehendaki, fine. Mungkin kita berbeza pandangan.
Tapi kita mempunyai kuasa yang boleh menentukan budaya di masa hadapan.
Polisi yang mesra wanita sudah tentu dia akan datang daripada pemimpin wanita.
Perang COVID-19 masih belum berakhir. Dalam kita berusaha memutuskan rantaian wabak ini, kita jangan terpedaya dengan virus maklumat palsu. Simak fakta melalui www.esraawani.com atau aplikasi Esra Awani. Teruskan berdisiplin, ratakan lengkungan pandemik ini.
The third wave of COVID-19 has taken us by storm. There's no room to take anything lightly. Everyone must follow all the steps to stop the spread of COVID-19. Social distancing, face mask, follow these steps, this SOP with the utmost discipline. Together, we can flatten the curve.
Bila sentuh soal berita, tiada masa untuk tunggu. Kepada anda kami bawakan fakta, susulan dan kupasan yang terkini. Tiada drama dan tiada pengulangan. Usah tunggu lama-lama. Awani 7.45 lebih awal dari biasa.
Kini berwajah baru.
Ini pula susulan khas pesawat Back Air di Kazakhstan. Pesawat berkenaan dilaporkan tergelincir 2 kali.
Notifikasi berita terkini dan navigasi mudah. Podcast dikemas kini dengan berita dan program.
Rebirth, Reformasi, Resistance and Hope.
Serta video tanpa had dengan scroll tanpa henti. Buat turun aplikasi baru
Hi, welcome back. You're watching Consider This. I'm Melissa Idris. With me is Sharad Kutin. Now, if you've just joined us on the show, we're discussing what can be done to stop the worsening humanitarian crisis in Gaza. News reports on the ground say that hospitals are overwhelmed and running low on medical supplies. Water and food supplies are running out, and thousands now have been displaced due to destroyed homes. What can be done to secure aid? Joining us on the line now is President of Mercy Malaysia, Datuk Dr. Ahmad Faizal Perdaus. Mercy Malaysia has been providing medical and humanitarian assistance to Palestine since 2008. It's a pleasure to have you, Dr. Faizal. Thank you for joining us on the show. Now, what do you understand to be the current situation on the ground in Gaza? I mean, how long before current supplies run out?
Thank you, Melissa. Thank you, Sharad. Well, first of all, the situation is very dire, and the situation is in fact critical in some parts of Gaza. At the moment, we are talking about 2 to 3 days of fuel, which is needed for generators to keep electricity going in some of the facilities that provide healthcare as well as hospitals. And we are talking about 3 to 4 days in some places where food is concerned. Although we feel that food could perhaps be mitigated by some supplies coming in from Egypt. Where medicines and medical equipment are concerned, in some of the hospitals, some of the equipment have already been damaged. But all in all, there will be a need for medicine, more importantly, to treat wounds and injuries, as well as paraphernalia to treat injuries, including for fractures and internal injuries. So these are the main priorities at the moment. Of course, going a little bit further down, we have also a priority list for the generators, because although fuel is needed more urgently, generators also. And third are equipment and also things that we can send over for shelters, emergency shelters. That is, we're not thinking of building anything at the moment, given the current situation. And of course, although some people might say that this should be further down the line, but for us and from our experience and from the current situation and reports that we're getting, some psychosocial mental health first aid is also needed urgently at the moment, especially for children.
Dr. Faizal, the international community and many stakeholders are actually involved in efforts in Gaza and the occupied territories, and before even this conflict broke out. What portion does Malaysia contribute to this international effort in the occupied territories, and how best can we, position ourselves in helping the Palestinians in the occupied territories?
Right. So there are 3 parts to that question. The first part is practically on the ground and inside. So inside the occupied territories, Malaysia, through its NGOs, has a bigger presence in Gaza. That's only because over the last decade or so, since late 2008, all the conflicts that have happened have occurred mainly in Gaza. So there are at least about a dozen Malaysian NGOs, including Mercy Malaysia, who are operational in Gaza, while there are many others who, from time to time, also participate or send aid or send assistance through, whether in peacetime as well as in war as currently. With regards to proportion, if we were to take amount of money, it would probably be small, probably less than 5%. That's because the money has to be counted in US dollars, yeah. So even if it's 10 million ringgit at current exchange rate, it's only about 2.5 million US dollars. There are a lot of other bigger donors, bigger NGOs, bigger countries involved: Turkey, Qatar, of course the UN agencies, etc., etc. So that's on one point. However, the impact that Malaysian NGOs have is a lot greater. Now, on the West Bank side, we don't have as much or as big a presence, and that's where we generally, both Mercy Malaysia and other NGOs, work with and through partners.
Dr. Faisal, can I ask you, how does COVID-19 complicate the situation? Does it?
Oh, very much, because even before the war broke out, even before the hostilities broke out, rather, both in the West Bank and in Gaza, Israel, of course, has done very, very well. Credit is due where it's due with regards to COVID-19 vaccination, and they've seen their cases drop from above 10,000 a day to a few hundred, and over the last few weeks only to double figures, and almost no deaths daily. However, the same cannot be said for the occupied Palestinian territories, and the Israelis have made it a point to announce that they do not bear the responsibility for vaccinating the Palestinians. So at the moment, with the current situation, with a largely unvaccinated Palestinian population, both in the occupied West Bank as well as in Gaza, as opposed to a almost fully vaccinated Israeli population now, the situation is very dire indeed, because you've got people cramped and holding up in very cramped situations, especially in Gaza, and even in the West Bank. People are congregating in demonstrations, etc., and that will lead to more transmission of the virus.
Sorry, well, very quickly, I wanted to ask you, can humanitarian aid be given safe passage through? Can it reach the people in need?
Right. This is a big issue, and I was just going to add just now that the problem now, of course, is that Israel is in control of all the border crossings except for one, which is Rafah, which is controlled by the Egyptians, who previously, prior to these outbreak of hostilities, that is the crossing from Sinai in Egypt into Gaza. Israel also had a tacit understanding with Israel not to open the crossings openly or freely. Thankfully, over the last few days, that has opened, and some aid is getting through. Israel has actually opened one of the crossings, which is Karom Shalem. However, that has been closed again because of fighting, and has yet to open the other crossing, which is in control of, which is Erez. And so humanitarian aid is getting through, but in a limited and slow manner.
Dr. Faisal, thank you for helping us understand the situation a bit better. Thank you for your time. We're going to take a quick break here and consider this, but stay tuned.
Ke depan dan maju. Induknya adalah Melayu.
Balik kepada Islam. This is orang yang membuat polisi.
Kalau itu yang dikehendaki, fine. Mungkin kita berbeza pandangan.
Tapi kita mempunyai kuasa yang boleh menentukan budaya di masa hadapan.
Polisi yang mesra wanita sudah tentu dia akan datang daripada pemimpin wanita.
Perang COVID-19 masih belum berakhir. Dalam kita berusaha memutuskan rantaian wabak ini, kita jangan terpedaya dengan virus maklumat palsu. Simak fakta melalui www.esraawani.com atau aplikasi Esra Awani. Teruskan berdisiplin, ratakan lengkungan pandemik ini.
The third wave of COVID-19 has taken us by storm. There's no room to take anything lightly. Everyone must follow.
Thanks so much for staying with Sharad and I on Consider This. Now, amidst the outpouring of support for Palestinians living in Gaza, there's a recognition that Palestinians are living among Malaysians even now. But who are they and what kind of lives have they carved out for themselves here? Let's speak now to Muslim Imran, chairperson of the Palestinian Cultural Organization Malaysia. Very quickly, Muslim, thank you so much for joining us tonight. But I was wondering whether you could help us understand the Palestinian community here. I mean, how many are currently here as students, as businessmen, as professionals, as refugees? How many would you say?
Hi, Rimi, Melissa. We have a big Palestinian community compared to other Arab communities here in the country. There are about 4,000 Palestinians. Majority are students and their families, but there are about 1,000 refugees and a few hundred expatriate Palestinians here in the country.
Muslim, I understand that many activists, local activists, especially on refugee rights, say that there's a gap between our expressed concern about what's happening in Gaza today and the fact that because we have not signed the Convention on Refugees, the UN Convention on Refugees, that Palestinian refugees here don't have such an easy time. And is that true? How are Palestinian refugees in Malaysia faring?
Okay, I believe the Palestinians in Malaysia are lucky in a way that the foreign policy of the Malaysian state is very consistent in supporting the Palestinian struggle. Throughout the past decades, in spite of changes in administration and leadership, the Malaysian leaders have been very committed to speak on behalf of the Palestinians, to voice out their concerns, to support their struggle politically, diplomatically, and even on the humanitarian level. For the Palestinian community here in Malaysia, we feel welcomed by the Malaysian society, by the Malaysian state, the Malaysian government, and although there are, of course, challenges for refugees, especially in terms of their basic human needs, being refugees in a country that has not signed international refugee conventions, makes it more challenging in getting a job, in possessing properties, in joining academic institutions, etc. That is a serious challenge, but the civil society sector here in Malaysia has been very accommodative. And to be honest, Palestinian refugees in particular here feel home. They want to go back to Palestine, certainly, but the way the Malaysian NGOs have been accommodating them, helping in scholarships, helping in different forms of aid, has been helping a lot, relieving a lot of stress and a lot of pain. But to be honest, with the COVID situation, things have become difficult for everybody, not only for refugee community, but for Malaysian citizens themselves. And we do understand the difficulties that everybody is facing at this time.
Muslim, I'm really glad that the refugee community here feels welcomed and is supported by civil society. But I'm wondering, does it feel a little bit hypocritical on the part of the government not recognizing the status of refugees in Malaysia, yet an international outpouring of support for what's happening in Palestine? Is there a bit of hypocrisy there, in your opinion?
I feel that the dynamics of Malaysia's foreign policy towards Palestine in particular are influenced by different elements. One is the country's position towards Islam and even in domestic politics. So they find Palestine, because most Palestinians are Muslims, they find Palestine as an important case, and because Al-Aqsa Mosque is a central issue for Muslims, so they find a need to articulate their support for Palestine in different ways. Another important dimension and influence over Malaysian foreign policy towards Palestine is the country's, international standing. Malaysia, in spite of all, shortcomings, is still well respected in the international community, and it is seeking to play a role. It is a middle power, after all. It is seeking to play a role in promoting certain causes. In the past, it was anti-apartheid in South Africa, and currently it finds the Palestinian issue as one of the issues that people here identify with, leaders and citizens. So I think,
if I can,
in a way,
yes,
this is
sorry, if I can interject. There is a concern, though, that perhaps when it comes to the Palestinian cause, that some people are jumping on the bandwagon and perhaps exploiting the situation, raising monies, not necessarily for Palestinians, but in the name of Palestinians. Are you concerned about that?
Okay, I do believe that the needs of the Palestinians are huge, and there is, of course, a legitimate concern on how to deliver aid and how to support the Palestinians. But having said that, I know that the Malaysian financial institutions here are well audited. I know that the government and the civil are working very hard to make sure that the funding that they send to Palestine is done in the best way possible. And to be honest, the Malaysian contribution to Palestine has not been mainly financial. Malaysia's financial contribution to Palestine is, in a way or another, limited compared to some of the other OIC member states. But Malaysia has been very consistent, and this is more important. So even though that comparatively, certain OIC member states contributed huge financial amounts to the Palestinian struggle, which requires a lot of aid. But Malaysia's contributions have been consistent, and in most cases, they have reached the needy. They have reached the society over there. There might be, isolated cases here or there of mistakes or errors, but there is institutional framework here in the country to fix these problems, which I totally appreciate and trust.
Muslim, thank you so much for joining us on the show tonight. Appreciate your time and your insights. Thank you. That's all we have for you on this episode of Consider This. But before we leave you, as always, a quick reminder that you can get the latest news and information on COVID-19 vaccines on astroawani.com as well as the Astro Awani app. Thank you so much for watching the show tonight. I'm Melissa Idris.
And I'm Sharad Kuttan, signing off for the evening.
We'll be back with you same time tomorrow. Till then, good night.
Good night.